Hey guys, today we're going on a journey through the dusty trails of a Viking village where fur clothing isn't just a fashion statement, it's a way of life, even in the blazing summer sun. Picture this, you're walking along a dirt path, surrounded by the creaking of wooden carts, smelling of the salty sea and freshly cut grass. Warriors in heavy fur capes are sweating, but they look like they're ready to conquer the world. You probably wouldn't survive an hour in this outfit in the July sun, but for the Vikings, it was business as usual. So before you settle in, give the video a like and subscribe. But only if you really like what I'm doing here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I'd love to know who's falling asleep with us in different parts of the world. Now dim the lights, turn on the fan to create a soft background hum, and let's begin this evening's journey together. You're standing outside a Viking village, somewhere on the coast of Scandinavia, circa 850. The air is warm, the sun is high, and yet every other person around you is wrapped in fur, wolf, bear, even the fur of a hare on the children running between the houses. Your modern sneakers sink into the soft earth as a woman walks past with a basket, her shoulders covered in a fox fur coat that sways in the breeze. You wince, imagining how hot she must be, but she looks like she's wearing the best outfit in the world. Why did the Vikings, famous for their practical approach, wear fur even in the heat? It's not just a whim of fashion, but a history full of meaning, tradition, and, yes, a little weirdness. The first thing you notice is the smell. Fur, even in the heat, carries a faint scent of forest, earth, and something wild, as if the animal is still out there somewhere. A man with a braided beard walks past, his coarse wool tunic trimmed with fur. You think, really? It's summer! But here's the thing. Fur wasn't just clothing for the Vikings, it was protection, status, and even a storyteller in their lives. The basic historical fact here is that fur was a versatile material that kept them warm in the winter, protected them from wind and rain, and in the summer it was part of their identity. Vikings didn't take off their fur the way you take off a jacket when it gets hot. It was like their second skin. You move closer to the longhouse, a wooden structure with a thatched roof from which comes the hum of voices. Inside, a craftsman sits by the fire, scraping a reindeer hide. He uses a stone scraper, and you hear a rhythmic sound, almost like a metronome, lulling you to sleep. This is your first oddity. Vikings didn't just wear fur, they worshipped it, sometimes even sleeping on skins that smelled of smoke and resin. Historians still argue whether wearing fur in the heat was more of a tradition or a functional necessity. Some say it protected from the sun, like an improvised umbrella. Others believe it was a way to show, I am a hunter, I am a warrior, I am a Viking. As you walk on, your gaze falls on a teenager proudly wearing a hair pelt that's clearly too big for him. You can't help but smile. It's like your little brother putting on his dad's jacket and pretending to be an adult. The Vikings loved gestures like this. Fur was their way of making a statement, even if it was a little impractical. You hear someone nearby discussing trade, furs in exchange for silver from distant lands. It hints at what's to come. Fur wasn't just clothing, it was currency, connecting the Vikings to the world. You walk on, the sun warming your neck, and you think, how did they put up with this? But the village goes on, furry shapes everywhere, part of the landscape. You stop by a small stream where a woman is rinsing fabric. Her fur cape is casually thrown onto the grass, and you can see the sun playing on its surface. It's not just clothes, it's a story that the Vikings wore on themselves. Every pelt bore the mark of a hunt, every seam of someone's skilled hands. You begin to understand that fur in the heat is not just an oddity, but part of their world, where practicality and pride went hand in hand. You breathe in the salty air, hear the cries of seagulls in the distance, and feel the village envelop you with its sounds and smells. This is only the beginning, and already you are immersed in their world, where fur is more than just fashion. You are still wandering around the Viking village, and the sun seems determined to roast you like a fish on a spit. People around you are wearing fur capes, and you can't help but wonder, why in Odin's name don't they take off their coats? Your t-shirt is already sticking to your back, and the Vikings don't seem to notice the heat. You approach a group of men sitting around a wooden table outside, their shoulders draped in wolf and bear skins. One of them, with a shaggy beard, shows off a fresh reindeer pelt, and you find yourself thinking, this isn't just clothing, it's their life. The basic historical fact here, the Vikings wore fur in the summer not out of stubbornness, but because it was their protection from the unpredictable Scandinavian weather. Summer in these parts meant not only sunshine, but also sudden rains, harsh sea winds, and cold nights. Fur, heavy and thick, was like a portable home that was always with you. You watch a woman walk past, her fox fur cape fluttering slightly, and you notice how it repels water when a light drizzle begins. It's as if your modern raincoat was also a status accessory. Sounds good, right? But here's the weird thing that makes you squint. Some Vikings wore fur not just on the outside, but on the inside, with the fur facing in. You can't help but cringe at the thought of how itchy it must be. Historians still debate whether it was for comfort or to wick away sweat, like some ancient tracksuits. One thing is clear, the Vikings weren't afraid to sweat for style. You pass a forge, hammers pounding iron, and you hear a blacksmith in a fur vest grumbling about the heat. You joke to yourself, dude, take that off and everything will be easier. But to him, fur is like your favorite sweater, the one you keep wearing even if it's a little threadbare. You walk on, and your gaze falls on a young guy trying to look cooler than he is. His fur cape is clearly stitched together from scraps hair, wolf, maybe even dog. It's like wearing a jacket made from old jeans and hoodies. He puffs out his chest proudly, and you can't help but smile. The Vikings clearly knew how to show off. Fur wasn't just clothing, it spoke of your exploits, of the beast you'd slain, or how much silver you'd spent at market. Remember the craftsman with the stone scraper from the village? Here, at the forge, you watch another craftsman processing a hide, the smell of tan leather mixing with the smoke from the fire. You stop at a small shed where a woman lays out pelts for sale. She's explaining something to a customer, pointing out the thick beaver fur. You catch snippets of conversation. Beaver fur was prized for its lightness and water-repellent properties. This was their Gore-Tex, but with a whiff. You think about your umbrella, always breaking, and you realize that maybe the Vikings were onto something. They weren't just enduring the heat for fashion's sake. Fur was their armor against the elements, their way of saying to the world, I'm ready for anything. You breathe in the salty air, hear the waves crashing on the shore nearby, and feel the village go on with its life. Furry silhouettes flit around you, and you begin to see them not just as odd, but as genius. You walk on, noticing the sun dipping toward the horizon. Children run around, their little fur vests bouncing, and you realize that this was a fashion for everyone, from warriors to toddlers. Even in the heat, the Vikings never wavered in their style, and you begin to respect their tenacity. It may not have been your choice, but in their world, fur was more than just clothing, it was part of their soul. You follow a path that leads to the edge of the forest, where the Viking village meets the wilderness. The sun is still hanging over the horizon, but a light breeze carries the scent of pine and damp earth. Around you are people in fur capes, and you begin to notice that every piece of fur tells a story. A stern-faced man, his wolf pelt hanging from his shoulders, stops to check a trap by a stream. You realize, fur is not just a fashion statement, it is prey snatched from the forest. You breathe in the air, saturated with the scent of pine, and hear a distant howl, maybe a wolf, or maybe just your mind playing games with you. The main historical fact of this section: Vikings hunted animals not only for food, but also for their fur, which was vital for their clothing and survival. Hunting was an art, a ritual, and a way to prove one's strength. You stand at the edge of the forest, watching a group of hunters return with their prey. Their spears gleam in the sun, and fresh reindeer and boar skins hang over their shoulders. You imagine them creeping through the forest, their hearts pounding, and every step could be their last. This is not your walk in the park with a coffee in your hand. One wrong step and you could become a bear's lunch. Here's your oddity for today. Some Vikings used furry animal tails as decoration, tying them to their belts or capes. You see a young hunter with a fluffy fox tail dangling from his belt and can't help but smile. It's like your friend putting a wolf sticker on his backpack to look cool. Historians still debate whether the tails were just a fashion statement or had some ritualistic meaning, like protection from evil spirits. You look at the hunter, and the way he struts tells you he knows he looks cool, even if he's swaying under that pelt. You follow the hunters to their camp, where the pelts are laid out on wooden frames to dry. The smell of raw fur mixes with the smoke from the fire, and you wince. This is not the scent of your favorite candle shop, but for the Vikings, this smell was part of life. They knew every animal. Bear fur was for warriors, hare for children, and beaver was prized for its lightness. Remember the woman by the stream, rinsing cloth next to her fur cape? Here you see another woman working on the pelt, scraping off the remains with a bone scraper. Her movements are slow, almost hypnotic, and you feel your own rhythm slowing, adjusting to this ancient dance. You notice one of the hunters, a young guy with freckles, showing off his first trophy, the pelt of a young deer. He's clearly trying to impress a girl nearby, and you can't help but chuckle. It's like your friend showing off his new bike, only here it's a dead deer. Hunting wasn't just about fur, it was about status, about proving that you could survive in this harsh world. You hear an older hunter telling the story of a bear he took down single-handedly, and everyone around you falls silent listening. It's their version of campfire stories, only with more fur. You walk away from the camp, heading back toward the village. Children run around, some in tiny fur vests, and you remember the teenager with the hair pelt, looking like he stole it from his older brother. Fur was everywhere, from hunting trophies to children's clothing, and you begin to see how it connected the Vikings to nature. You breathe in the cool evening air, hear the rustle of leaves, and feel the village preparing for the night. Furry shapes flicker in the sunset light, and you realize that hunting was more than just a job, it was their life, their pride, their fashion. You stand at the entrance to a Viking longhouse, and the smell of smoke from the fire mingles with something tart, as if someone had spilled meat on the floor. The sun is already setting, and inside the longhouse, oil lamps flicker, casting shadows on the fur-covered walls. You hear the rhythmic creaking of a woman sitting at a wooden loom, stitching together pieces of fur. Her hands move confidently, a bone needle darting deftly into the rough leather. You can almost feel the warmth of the fur beneath your fingers, even though you're standing off to the side, your t-shirt feeling thin compared to their finery. This is where fur goes from being hunted to fashion, and you're ready to learn how it happened. Key historical fact: Vikings were masters at sewing fur garments, using needles made of bone or iron and threads made from animal sinew, making their clothing strong and durable. You watch a woman carefully stitch together pieces of reindeer hide to create a cape that looks like it could survive a storm. Her movements are slow, almost lulling, and you find yourself thinking that it's like watching someone knit a sweater, only with a lot more fur. Sewing wasn't just a craft, it was an art that required patience and skill, especially in the dim light of a longhouse. Here's your oddity for today. Vikings sometimes decorated the seams of their fur outfits with colored threads made from plant dyes, adding bright patterns that stood out against the dark wool. You see another woman weaving red thread into a seam, and it reminds you of your old backpack with an embroidered logo. Only here it was done by hand, without a sewing machine. Historians still debate whether the colored stitching was just decoration or had some symbolic meaning, like family or status. You look at the pattern and think, it's like a tattoo, only on clothing, and maybe with less pain. You come closer, and the smell of tan leather becomes stronger. The woman sewing glances at you, and you almost feel like an intruder. But she goes back to her work, and you notice how carefully she adjusts the pieces of fur so that they fit like a second skin. Remember the hunters with their fresh pelts by the forest? Here, those pelts become something more: clothing that will protect against wind, rain, and yes, even the summer sun. You see a child nearby tugging at the edge of a bearskin, and the woman gently pushes him away. You can't help but smile. It's like your little brother trying to help you with your cooking, only with fur instead of dough. Sewing was a communal activity. You noticed several women sitting in a semicircle, passing tools around and exchanging quiet jokes. One of them tugs at another's crooked seam, and you hear laughter that sounds so familiar, as if it were your friends teasing you about a bad haircut. They use animal sinew, which you learn is stronger than it looks, and doesn't break even under the weight of thick fur. You can imagine how hard it was to get these materials. No fabric stores, just what nature or the hunt provided. You step back to the wall where the finished cloaks hang and run your finger over the soft hair fur. It's surprisingly light, almost like your old blanket, but with a history that you can feel beneath your fingers. These stitches, these pieces of fur, they were part of Viking life, their way of coping with the world. You hear the fire crackling in the hearth, and the shadows dance on the walls, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the heat outside. The longhouse feels alive, and you begin to understand why the Vikings prized their fur garments so much. They weren't just clothes, they were part of their home, their world. You are still in the longhouse, where the smell of smoke and tan leather envelops you like a warm blanket. The fire crackles in a hearth, and you hear the soft hum of voices mingling with the rhythmic scraping of bone needles. Around you, women are working on fur capes, their hands moving with confidence, as if they were slow dancing with leather and thread. You notice one of them, her long braid draped over her shoulder, carefully sewing a fur trim onto a wool tunic. Her face is calm, but there is pride in her eyes. You begin to understand that Viking fashion was not just the work of men and their hunting trophies, but also the skill of women who set the style. Key historical fact: Viking women played a key role in the creation of clothing, including fur garments, and their work influenced the fashion and social status of the family. You watch this woman pick up a piece of wolf fur, testing it by touch, and you can almost hear her considering whether it would be suitable for a warrior or a child's vest. Her decisions are not just sewing, they are an art that determines how the village is seen by its neighbors or traders. You can't help but smile as you imagine her arguing with her hunter husband about which fur was best, just like you and your friends arguing about which sneakers are cooler. Here's your oddity for today. Some Viking women would weave their own hair into their fur garments, to add a personal touch or perhaps for good luck. You watch one of the craftswomen cut a thin strand and weave it into a seam, and it's both creepy and touching. Historians still debate whether it was a ritual tied to their beliefs or simply a way of saying, "I did this." You look at her concentrated face and think, it's like signing your name to a painting, only the canvas is a bare pelt. You come closer, and the woman with the scythe notices you. She doesn't say a word, but gestures to look at her work. A fox fur cape as soft as a cloud. You run your finger over the surface, and it's so smooth you almost forget the heat outside. Remember the seamstress you saw earlier with the colored threads? Here you see another woman adding a yellow thread made from some plant, and the pattern comes alive like a ray of sunlight on fur. These women weren't just sewing, they were creating stories that their families carry. You hear one of them tease another about a stitch that's too long, and the laughter echoes through the long house like a familiar melody. You move to the corner where the finished garments hang and notice how carefully they are made. Each cape is not just protection from the weather, but a mark of skill. Viking women didn't just follow fashion, they created it, choosing what fur to use, how to decorate it, and who would wear it. You watch as a young girl, clearly an apprentice, tries to replicate a complex stitch, and her older mentor gently corrects her. It reminds you of your mother teaching you to cook, patiently showing you how to hold a knife. Here in the longhouse, not only skill is passed on, but pride too. You breathe in the warm air, scented with fur and resin, and hear the seagulls crying outside. The women continue to work, their voices merging into a soft hum, and you feel the rhythm lull you to sleep. The fur garments they create are not just clothes, but part of their world, where every line speaks of care, strength, and creativity. You begin to respect these women who turned rough pelts into works of art, setting the tone for the entire village. You are still in the longhouse, where the warmth of the hearth and the smell of fur create coziness despite the summer heat outside. Your eyes have adjusted to the dim light, and you begin to notice details that previously eluded you. Not only the fur capes, but also the small embellishments the Vikings added to their outfits. You approach a wooden bench where a woman lays out strange accessories, bone beads, antler pendants, even small amulets carved from deer hooves. The items glitter in the lamplight, and you feel them draw your gaze, as if whispering their own stories. These aren't just clothes, they're a style that screams, "I'm a Viking, and I have taste." Key historical fact: Vikings decorated their fur outfits with items made from animal bones, horns, and teeth, which served not only as decoration but also as symbols of strength or protection. You watch a woman string tiny bone beads onto a thread, each one carved with such precision that you can almost hear the knife scraping the bone. These decorations were like the medals you wear after a victory, only instead of medals, there were wolf fangs or deer antlers. You imagine how hard it was to carve these tiny things without modern tools, and your hand involuntarily reaches for the phone in your pocket. Yeah, you definitely couldn't do it. Here's your oddity for today. Some Vikings wore amulets made from the teeth of sea creatures, like seals, around their necks, believing they brought good luck on their voyages. You see a man adjusting one, and it glistens like a pearl on his fur tunic. It's like wearing a souvenir from a beach holiday, only with a seal tooth instead of a shell. Historians still debate whether these amulets were just decorations or part of a belief system connected to sea gods. You look at the man and think, he must have felt invulnerable with that tooth around his neck. As you walk on, your gaze falls on a young woman weaving bone beads into her fur cape. She giggles as one falls to the floor, and you can't help but smile. It's like your friend dropping a pizza at a party and trying to pretend he's in control. These decorations weren't just for show, they told a story about the wearer. Remember the woman with the braid who was sewing the cape? Here, you see another craftswoman attaching a horn pendant to a fur cape, and it looks like she's adding a signature to her work. Each bead, each piece of bone is a story of hunting, or trade, or even someone's good fortune. You stop at a table where the carving tools are laid out, small knives and pieces of horn. The smell of bone mixed with smoke tickles your nose, and you wince, but it's also strangely calming. You notice one of the craftsmen, an older man with wrinkled hands, carving a tiny amulet in the shape of Thor's hammer. His movements are slow, almost hypnotic, and you feel your pulse slow. These ornaments were part of their world, where every piece of clothing said, "I lived through this." You think of hunters with their fox tails, and you think that these bone beads are an extension of them, another way to show a connection with nature. You walk away, hearing the women discussing which horn looks best on a warrior and which on a child. Their voices are soft but full of life, and you feel the warmth of the longhouse enveloping you. These ornaments of bone and horn were more than just an addition to their furs. They were part of their identity, their way of telling the world who they were. You breathe in the air, scented with resin and leather, and hear the distant sound of the waves. The Viking world is getting closer, and you are almost ready to try on one of these pendants. You leave the lawn house, and the evening air greets you with a coolness mingled with the salty smell of the sea. The Viking village has come to life in a new way. Longships bob at the pier, their sails furled, and traders bustle about unloading bales of furs. You hear the creak of planks and the dull thud of barrels rolling along the shore. Your sneakers sink into the sand as you notice one of the merchants, wearing a luxurious bearskin, haggling with a stranger in a colorful tunic. Fur is not just clothing here, it is currency that connects the Vikings to distant lands. You feel the wind off the fjord ruffling your hair, and you begin to understand why these people valued their pelts so much. Key historical fact: Vikings traded furs extensively, exchanging them for silver, silk, and spices along trade routes that stretched from Scandinavia to the Middle East. You walk up to the dock, where a man with a thick beard lays out beaver and fox pelts on a wooden table. His scarred hands deftly straighten the furs, and you watch as a foreign merchant, perhaps from as far away as Constantinople, inspects the merchandise. It's like trading your old sneakers at the market, only there's more at stake here. The fur was their ticket to the big wide world. Here's your oddity for today. Some Vikings decorated their fur trading bales with carved runes, to identify the owner or perhaps to deter thieves. You notice one of the bales is marked with a crudely carved symbol that looks like a lightning bolt, and it strikes you as some kind of ancient QR code. Historians still debate whether the runes were just markings or had magical significance, like protection from evil spirits. You look at the trader and think, he must have felt like a rock star, sending his furs across the sea with a signature like that. You walk along the shore, where longships bob in the waves, and you hear traders discussing how much silver a wolf pelt can fetch. One of them, a young man with a sly smile, boasts that his furs have traveled all the way to Baghdad. You can't help but chuckle. It's like your friend bragging about how his social media post has gone viral. Remember the bone beads that women wove into their fur capes? Here you see a trader holding up a pelt decorated with the same beads, explaining that it drives up the price. Fur wasn't just a commodity. It was a work of art, valued for its craftsmanship and history. You stop by a campfire where a group of traders are warming themselves despite the summer evening. The smell of salt and wet fur mixes with the smoke, and you wince, but it's also strangely comforting. One of them tells of a journey he took up the rivers, trading pelts for glass beads and spices. You imagine him sailing through the rough waters, carrying bales of fur that smelled of forest and home. This isn't your half-hour pizza delivery, this is a months-long journey, full of risk and hope. You hear another trader taunt a young man for nearly drowning his pelts, and their laughter echoes across the fjord. You step away from the fire, feeling the evening air grow cooler. The fur-clad figures of the traders flicker in the sunset light, and you begin to see how their finery was not just for warmth, but also to display wealth. Fur connected them to the world beyond the fjords, to cities you had only read about in books. You breathe in the salty breeze, hear the lapping of the waves, and sense the village living its trading life, each pelt a story waiting to be transported. You stand on the shore of the fjord, the waves lapping gently against the rocks and the sunset painting the sky a soft orange. The Viking village around you is buzzing, with traders stacking their fur bales, children running around screaming, and the smell of salt and smoke in the air. You notice the chieftain, a tall man with a thick beard, emerging from the lawn house wearing a luxurious bearskin that almost touches the ground. His cape isn't just clothing, it screams power, and everyone around him falls silent as he passes. You sense how fur in this village means more than just protection from the cold. It speaks volumes about who you are in this harsh world. Basic historical fact: fur was a status symbol in Viking society, where the quality and type of pelt indicated a person's wealth, power, or position. You look at a chieftain whose bearskin gleams in the sunset light and realize that this isn't just an outfit. It's like an expensive suit you're wearing to impress everyone. Only here, instead of brands, there are trophies from a hunt. You imagine how he probably brought down that bear himself, and your respect for him grows, even if the thought of such an outfit makes you hot in the summer. Here's your oddity for today. Some Vikings wore fur capes with embroidered patterns that identified their family or clan, like an ancient coat of arms. You notice how the chieftain's pelt is stitched in rough patterns that form what looks like a wolf's head. It's like wearing a t-shirt with your team's logo, only made of heavy fur instead of cotton. Historians still debate whether the patterns were just decoration or had ritual significance, linked to protection or ancestors. You look at that chieftain and think, he must have felt like a king, striding around in that outfit. You walk on, past the wooden houses where people gather around fires. A woman in a fox cape, with bone beads in her hair, remember those ornaments from the lawn house, adjusts her pelt to fit perfectly. You see how her attire, while not as fancy as the chieftain's, still sets her apart. Fur was a way to show that you were more than just a peasant hauling fish, but someone who could afford a fox or beaver pelt. You can't help but smile as you imagine your friend showing off his new coat, only here it was a pelt that was obtained at great personal risk. You walk over to a group of warriors sitting around a fire. One of them, a wolf pelt slung over his shoulders, is telling a story about his last expedition, and you notice how his fur cape is stained with sea salt. It reminds you of the merchants at the docks trading furs for silver and spices. Here, by the fire, fur is not only a status symbol, but also a protection that has accompanied them to sea. You overhear another warrior tease a young boy about his hair pelt, saying, "That's for children, not for battle." Laughter echoes across the fjord, and you feel the warmth of the moment despite the cool evening air. You step away from the fire, noticing the furry shapes flickering in the twilight. Even in the heat, these pelts were part of their world, where each cloak spoke of its owner, warrior, chieftain, trader, or craftsman. You breathe in the salty air, hear the distant lapping of the waves, and feel the village preparing for the night. The fur was their armor, their pride, their way of distinguishing themselves. You begin to understand that wearing a bear or a wolf on your shoulders is not just a fashion statement, but a personal statement. You walk along the path along the fjord, where the evening air grows cooler and the Viking village grows quiet under the light of the first stars. The smell of salt and wet wood mingles with the smoke from the fires, and you notice how the people around you still wear their fur cloaks despite the summer night. You see a woman adjusting a lightweight pelt over her shoulders. It's not as heavy as the chieftain's bearskin, but it still looks too warm for this time of year. You begin to wonder, are all the stories about Vikings carrying fur in the heat exaggerated? Or is there something you haven't figured out yet? Your sneakers crunch on the gravel, and you're ready to sort out the myths and truths of summer capes. Key historical fact: Vikings' summer fur capes were often lighter and thinner than their winter ones, made from hare or fox skins to combine style with warm weather practicality. You walk up to a group of women sitting by the water, sorting through the fine pelts, almost translucent in the moonlight. The capes aren't as bulky as the ones you've seen on warriors, and you realize that Vikings weren't madmen lugging bear skins around in the heat. They knew how to adapt, choosing fur that breathed but still looked like a symbol of their strength. It's like choosing a lightweight parka over a puffer jacket to stay stylish. Here's your oddity for today. Some Vikings would apply oils to their summer pelts to make them water repellent, which sometimes gave them a weird sheen, like patent leather. You watch a woman rub something into a hair pelt, and it glistens like it's wet. It reminds you of that time you waxed your boots to survive the rain, only here it smells like fish and tar. Historians still debate whether it was seal oil or plant concoctions, but you look at the shiny pelt and think, this is like an ancient fashion hack. You move on, noticing a young guy in a lightweight fox pelt showing off to his friends. His pelt is thin, almost weightless, and you can't help but smile. It's like your friend wearing a designer t-shirt to show off. Remember the chieftain with his luxurious bear pelt? Here you see that not all furs were so heavy. Summer pelts were designed to allow for freedom of movement but still said, "I'm a Viking." You overhear the guy joke that his pelt is lighter than Freya's feathers, and his friends laugh, and you think this is their version of a party with witty banter. You stop by a small fire, where an old man talks about how summer pelts protected you from sudden rainstorms. He shows you his cloak, worn but still holding up. You think of the merchants at the docks, trading furs for silk, and realize that even these lightweight pelts were a valuable commodity. They weren't just for protection from the weather, but to show that you could still be stylish in the heat. The smell of the fire and the sea calms you, and you feel the rhythm of the village slow down as the night approaches. You step away, hearing the waves crashing on the shore and seeing the moon reflected in the water. The Vikings' summer cloaks were their way of balancing tradition and practicality, and you begin to respect their ability to look cool without dying from the heat. Furry silhouettes flicker in the darkness, and you realize that the myths about Vikings lugging heavy coats in the summer are only part of the story. They were smarter than you thought, and their fashion was proof of it. You wander around the edge of a Viking village, where the stars are already shining brightly over the fjord and the air is filled with the smell of wet grass and the distant sea. The path leads you a little further away from the noisy fires to a small group of huts where the Sami live neighbors of the Vikings, whose culture is as mysterious as the night sky. You notice a woman wearing a fur cape, decorated with embroidery like the northern lights. Her clothes are different from those you have seen on the Vikings. The fur is finer, the patterns are more complex, and you sense that she knows secrets that the Vikings adopted with respect. The moon lights her path, and you follow her, curiosity pulling you forward. Key historical fact: The Sami, an indigenous people of the north, influenced Viking fashion by sharing fur processing techniques that made clothing lighter and warmer. You watch a woman adjust her reindeer fur cape and notice how it sits almost weightlessly on her shoulders. These aren't the heavy wolf or bear pelts you saw the chieftain wearing, but something delicate, made for the harsh climate. You imagine the Vikings seeing these outfits and deciding to adopt their tricks so they wouldn't sweat in their summer furs. It's like seeing a cool hiking hack from a friend and immediately wanting to try it. Here's your oddity for today. The Sami sometimes decorated fur with tiny pieces of tin wire, weaving them into the seams to create a sparkle that caught the light even in the dark. You see a woman's cape glittering like it was covered in tiny stars, and it seems magical to you. Historians still debate whether it was just decoration or part of rituals tied to their belief in nature spirits. You look at those shiny seams and think, it's like putting reflective stickers on your jacket, only without the glue and with so much more meaning. You walk closer to a hut where a few Sami are sitting around a fire, discussing something in their language. Their fur capes are decorated not only with wire, but also with embroidery, reminding you of the patterns you saw in a Viking longhouse. Remember those colored threads that the women wove into the seams? Here you see a Sami craftsman showing a Viking how to make fur lighter by piercing it for ventilation. It's like a master class, only instead of YouTube, there's a live exchange of knowledge around a campfire. You hear a Viking joke that his coat now breathes better than he does, and their laughter echoes softly into the night. You walk to the edge of the clearing, where a reindeer grazes in the darkness, its fur glinting faintly in the moonlight. The Sami knew how to use every bit of the animal, and their fur garments were not only beautiful but incredibly practical. You think back to the merchants at the docks, showing off their furs, and realize that some of their finest pelts may have come from the Sami. These neighbors taught the Vikings how to make fashion not just a status symbol, but an art of survival. You breathe in the cool air, feeling it refresh your skin, and hear the distant howl of the wind, almost like a song. You stand looking up at the stars and watch as a woman in a glittering cape disappears into a hut. Her garment is a bridge between the Sami and Viking worlds, where fur becomes more than just clothing, but a story of exchange and respect. You come to appreciate how these two people shared ideas, creating fashion that was both beautiful and clever. The night falls around you and you feel the village grow quiet, preparing to sleep under the stars. You return to the heart of the Viking village, where night has fallen completely and only the light of the fires and the moon illuminate the paths. The smell of smoke and sea mingles with the scent of freshly cut grass, and you hear children giggling nearby, playing in the shadows of the lawn houses. You notice a group of toddlers running around in tiny fur vests that seem almost comically large for their skinny shoulders. One of them, with wild blonde hair, proudly drags a hair pelt along the ground. You can't help but smile. It's like your little brother putting on your jacket and pretending to be an adult. But there's more to these little furs than just a cute picture. Key historical fact: Viking children wore fur outfits, often made from leftover skins, to learn how to belong and cope with a harsh climate. You watch a girl no older than 6 adjust her rabbit fur vest and realize that this is not just clothing, it is their first step into the adult world. These little pelts, though light, taught children the value of warmth and protection that fur provided, even in summer. You imagine their mothers, the same women of the longhouse, sewing these vests with the same care they took to create the capes for the warriors. Here's your oddity for today. Some children's fur coats were adorned with tiny amulets carved into the shapes of animals, believed to protect the little ones from evil spirits. You see a little wooden bear figurine dangling from his vest, and you find it both endearing and slightly creepy. Historians still debate whether these amulets were just toys or part of rituals tied to beliefs in forest spirits. You look at the boy proudly showing his amulet to his friend and think, it's like wearing a superhero keychain as a kid, only with more mysticism. You walk on, hearing the mother calling her children home, her voice soft but insistent. She adjusts the fur hat on one of the little ones, and you think of the Sami woman with her shiny cape. Here in the village, the children's furs were simpler, often made from scraps, but they still carried the same pride. You notice the girl trying to imitate the adults, draping her pelt over hers to look like the chieftain you saw by the fire. It reminds you of when you were a child trying to tie a tie like your father's, and ending up with a knot the size of a fist. You stop at a small house where a woman is tucking her children into bed on fur mats. The smell of warm fur and straw is soothing, and you feel your own eyelids growing heavy. These little vests weren't just clothes. They were a way to introduce the children to the Viking world, where fur meant strength, warmth, and a connection to nature. You hear the mother humming, softly, almost whispering, and the children fall asleep, wrapped in their tiny furs. It's like a lullaby, but with fur and care instead of words. You walk away from the house, hearing the night fall silent over the village. The fur vests the children wear are not just a fashion statement, but part of their training, their way of becoming part of the tribe. You breathe in the cool air, feeling the stars twinkle overhead, and you realize that even the smallest Vikings carried the pride of their people, wrapped in the fur that was their heritage. You stand in the center of the Viking village, where the night has fully come into its own, and the stars twinkle above the roofs of the long houses. The smell of smoke from the fires mingles with the aroma of roasting meat and mead wafting from the great hall, where a feast is in full swing. You hear laughter, the clink of goblets, and snatches of songs that sound like ancient sagas. All around you, the people are dressed in their finest furs, the pelts of wolves, foxes, and even the rare polar bear, shimmering in the torchlight. You notice the warrior adjusting his cape, decorated with bone beads, and you realize that Viking fashion shines brightest at feasts. Your sneakers seem out of place among the splendor, but you walk closer, mesmerized by the spectacle. Basic historical fact: Vikings wore their most luxurious furs at festivals and rituals to demonstrate wealth, status, and connection to tradition. You walk into a hall where the chieftain, the one you saw in the bearskin, sits at the head of the table, his cape decorated with the red thread you saw in the craftswoman's barn. It's not just clothing, it's like a formal suit that says, "I'm the boss here." You can feel the warmth of the fire, the smell of mead tickles your nose, and you can almost hear the goblets clinking together as people celebrate. Here's your oddity for today. Some Vikings attached small bronze bells to their festive furs that jingled softly as they moved, adding a melody to their footsteps. You see a woman whose fox fur cape makes a soft jingle, and it reminds you of the Christmas costume you wore as a child, only here it looks majestic. Historians still debate whether these bells were just decoration or part of rituals associated with gods like Freya or Thor. You look at the woman moving with grace and think, those bells must have made heads turn. You make your way through the crowd, where people are dancing and laughing. One warrior, wearing a wolf skin decorated with tin wire, remember the Sani capes, is trying to impress a girl by waving a goblet. You can't help but smile. It's like your friend at a party spilling a drink in an attempt to look cool. Fur at a feast wasn't just clothing, it was a way to stand out. You see a young girl in a light hair cape, dyed blue, twirling in a dance, her skin almost seeming alive in the firelight. These outfits were made for moments like these, to shine, to tell a story. You stop at the wall where spare pelts hang, ready for those who may have stained their finery with mead. The smell of fur and resin is soothing, and you feel the rhythm of the feast slow in your perception. You remember the children in their tiny vests, imitating the adults, and you realize that here, at the feast, fashion is theater. Every fur, every bead, every jingle of a bell is part of the performance where the Vikings showed who they were. You hear the old man by the fire joke that his pelt has survived more feasts than he has, and laughter spreads through the hall like a wave. You breathe in the warm air, scented with the scent of food and fur, and hear the music fade to quiet conversations. Viking festive attire is not just a fashion statement, but a way to unite people, to show their strength and pride. You feel the night deepen, and the feast seems to be drawing to a close, leaving behind warmth and memories. You leave the noisy feast, and the night air greets you with a coolness infused with the scent of the sea and pine resin. The Viking village falls silent, only the occasional voice and the crackling of coals breaking the silence. You walk down a moonlit path and notice a woman sitting by a wooden barn. She is carefully brushing a wolfskin, her hands moving slowly, brushing away the dirt with a soft horsehair brush. The fur glistens under the stars, and you understand the painstaking work behind those outfits that were so proudly worn at the feast. Your sneakers tread softly on the ground, and you are ready to learn how the Vikings preserved their furs in a harsh climate. Key historical fact: Vikings carefully cared for their fur, using natural oils, smoke, and brushes to protect the pelts from dampness and wear, especially in Scandinavia's changeable climate. You watch a woman rub something that smells of fish and herbs into the pelts, and the fur becomes softer, almost alive to the touch. This isn't your shoe spray, but a complex process that required knowledge passed down through generations. You imagine them storing these pelts in long houses, away from dampness, and you feel respect for their ability to take care of things. Here's your oddity for today. Some Vikings dried fur over smoky fires to impart a scent they believed would repel insects. You see a small fire burning next to a barn, and a woman hanging a pelt over the smoke that curls up like a ghost. It reminds you of the time you once tried to fix an old coat with varnish, and the results were, well, not the best. Historians still debate whether this smoking ritual was just to protect the fur or part of a purification belief. You look at the woman and think, she probably knew that the smell of smoke was not only practical, but also made you smell like home. You come closer and the woman glances at you, but her hands don't stop. She scrubs at the pelt, removing small clumps of dirt, and you remember the dyed furs from the feast shimmering in the torchlight. Those pelts had to be constantly tended to stay so beautiful. You hear another woman nearby, joking that her husband forgot to clean his cloak, and now it smells worse than wet dog. Their laughter carries softly into the night, and you can't help but smile, like your friends teasing you for having a stain on your shirt. You walk to the edge of the shed, where several pelts hang, ready to be used. The smell of oil and smoke envelops you, and you feel it soothing, like a warm blanket. You think of children in their tiny vests, who were probably brushed with the same care. Grooming the fur was more than just a chore, it was a way to stay connected to nature, to hunting, to family. You watch the woman carefully fold the pelt, her movements so fluid that you almost fall asleep standing there. It's like watching a slow dance, each brush a step. You stand there, breathing in the cool air, and you can hear the waves crashing on the shore in the distance. The fur the Vikings so carefully preserved was their treasure, their protection, their history. You feel the night deepen and the village seems to be preparing for sleep, wrapped in their furs that have survived the rains and winds and time. You stand at the edge of a Viking village, where the night has fallen softly over everything and the stars above the fjord sparkle like scattered jewels. The smell of the sea and the smoke from dying fires mingles with the light scent of the pine forest, and you feel the village quiet, preparing for sleep. Your sneakers crunch softly on the gravel as you walk past the long houses where fur capes hang on the walls like trophies. You notice the last of the craftsmen, an elderly woman sitting at the door, adjusting a hair pelt. Her movements are slow, almost ritualistic, and you know this is your last glimpse of Viking fur fashion. The village sleeps, but its stories still whisper in the night. Key historical fact: Viking fur fashion was not only practical, but deeply woven into their culture, combining hunting, craftsmanship, and social status into one. You look at a pelt in a woman's hands, and it seems not just a garment, but a symbol of everything you've seen: hunting, sewing, trading, feasting. It's as if your favorite sweater holds memories of every day you've worn it. Fur was their way of telling the world who they were, and even in the quiet of the night, it continues to speak. Here's your oddity for today. Some Vikings sewed tiny talismans, like stones or pieces of wood, into their fur coats, believing they brought good luck. You see a woman tucking something into a seam of her fur coat, and it seems such a personal, almost intimate gesture. Historians still debate whether these talismans were just a tradition or part of a belief in spirits guarding the owner. You look at her wrinkled hands and think, it's as if you were carrying a lucky coin in your pocket, only sewn into the fur. The night has wrapped the Viking village in a quiet embrace, and you stand near the shore where the fjord's gentle waves lap against the rocks. The air carries the scent of salt and pine, and a faint glow from a nearby bonfire flickers, casting shadows that dance like spirits. You hear low voices, a rhythmic hum of storytelling, and you're drawn to a small group gathered around the fire. They're wrapped in their fur capes, some gleaming with the faint sheen of oil you saw applied earlier, others adorned with the bone beads you admired in the longhouse. An elder, his wolf skin worn but proud, begins a tale, and you settle in, your sneakers sinking into the soft earth, ready to hear the legends of mythical beasts that shaped the Vikings' fur fashion. The main historical fact here is that Viking fashion was deeply influenced by their mythology, with fur often chosen to reflect stories of legendary creatures like wolves or bears, believed to carry divine power. You listen as the elder describes a great wolf, Fenrir, whose hide, according to legend, could grant strength to those who wore it. His voice is low, almost a whisper, and you feel the weight of the story, as if the fur on his shoulders carries a piece of that myth. You imagine warriors choosing wolf fur not just for warmth, but to channel the ferocity of a beast that could challenge the gods. It's like you wearing a superhero shirt to feel invincible, except this comes with a side of epic saga. Here's your strange tidbit for tonight. Some Vikings believed that wearing the fur of a specific animal could let you borrow its spirit, like a bear's courage or a fox's cunning. You notice a young warrior by the fire, his fox cape catching the light, and you wonder if he thinks he's slyer because of it. It's like if you wore a tiger print jacket to feel fiercer, only these guys actually believe it worked. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were purely symbolic or if Vikings thought they could literally tap into an animal's essence. You look at the warrior, his eyes gleaming with pride, and think, maybe he feels a little foxy tonight. You shift closer to the fire, the warmth brushing your face, and the elder's story shifts to a mythical white bear said to roam the icy north. His tale paints a picture of a hunt that never happened, yet the white bear skin, like the one you saw at the feast, became a prize for the elite. You recall the leader in his grand cape, and you realize these stories weren't just bedtime tales, they shaped what people wore. The elder's voice weaves through the night, and you hear a soft chuckle as a child, wrapped in a tiny bunny vest like the ones you saw earlier, asks if the bear still roams. The group laughs, and it's like your family giggling over a ghost story, only with more fur and fewer marshmallows. You glanced at the surrounding figures, their furry silhouettes blending into the darkness. The stories they tell aren't just about beasts. They're about why they chose these skins, why they stitched them with care, like the colored threads you saw in the longhouse. Each tale feels like a thread connecting the hunt, the trade, and the feasts you witnessed. The elder describes a hunter who wore a wolf skin to face a storm, believing it carried Fenrir's strength. You can almost feel the weight of that skin, the way it must have felt like armor against the wind. The fire crackles, and the scent of smoke mingles with the fur, pulling you deeper into the story. You step back, the stars above twinkling like the tin wire in the Sami cape you saw. These legends weren't just stories, they were the heartbeat of Viking fashion, making every skin a piece of their mythology. You breathe in the cool night air, hearing the distant waves, and feel the village settling into sleep. The fur capes around you seem alive with the spirits of wolves and bears, whispering tales as old as the fjords themselves. The Viking village is now a whisper of its daytime self, with only the soft glow of dying embers and a faint lapping of the fjord breaking the silence. You wander back toward the longhouse, your sneakers barely making a sound on the packed earth. The air smells of cooling stone and lingering smoke, and you notice a lone figure sitting by the door, a woman stitching a fur cape under the moonlight. Her bone needle glints as she works, pulling together pieces of fox fur with steady hands. This is the final touch, the last stitch before the village sleeps, and you realize the Vikings' day ended with preparing their outfits for tomorrow. You pause, drawn into the quiet rhythm of her work, ready to see how they closed the day with their fur fashion. The main historical fact is that the Vikings often repaired and prepared their fur outfits at night, ensuring they were ready for the next day's work, trade, or celebration. You watch the woman as she inspects a wool skin, her fingers tracing a worn seam before stitching it anew. This wasn't just maintenance, it was a ritual, a way to honor the fur that protected them. You think of how you might charge your phone or lay out clothes before bed, but this feels more deliberate, like a promise to the next dawn. Her movements are slow, almost meditative, and you feel your own breath slowing to match her pace. Here's your strange tidbit: some Vikings rubbed their fur with crushed herbs, like rosemary or thyme, believing it kept the skin fresh and warded off bad luck. You catch a faint whiff of something herbal as the woman works, and it's oddly soothing, like a candle you'd light to relax. Historians still debate whether these herbs were purely practical, to mask odors, or tied to spiritual beliefs about protection. You look at her focused expression and think, maybe it was both, like how you spray cologne before a big day, hoping it'll boost your confidence. You step closer, and the woman doesn't look up, her hands moving with the precision you saw in the longhouse where the craftswomen sewed. You recall the colored threads and bone beads, and here you see a simpler task, just a repair, but done with the same care. She's fixing a children's vest, probably for one of those kids you saw running around, and you smile, thinking of how your mom might have patched your jeans with the same quiet focus. The fur feels alive under her hands, a reminder of the hunt, the trade, and the feasts that shaped it. You hear a distant chuckle from another house, maybe someone joking about a torn skin, and it's like your friends laughing over a ripped shirt at a party. You lean against the wall, the scent of herbs and fur blending into the night air. The woman finishes her stitch, folding the cape with care, and you realize this act was as much about tomorrow as it was about today. The Vikings didn't just wear fur, they lived with it, tending to it like a companion. You recall the Sami cape with its tin wire, and you see that same reverence here in this quiet moment. The village is asleep, but this last stitch feels like a final note in a lullaby, tying the day together. You breathe in the cool air, hearing the fjord's gentle rhythm, and feel the weight of the night settle around you. The fur, so carefully stitched, is ready for another day of stories, just as you're ready to drift into sleep, wrapped in the warmth of this ancient world. You walk on, past the longhouse where the torchlight has almost died. You remember the chieftain in his bearskin, the children in their tiny vests, the Sami woman with her glittering cloak. Every skin you saw carried a story of hunting, of trade, of feasting, of loving care. You hear a warrior in the distance teasing a friend whose skin has torn, their soft laughter blending with the sound of the waves. It reminds you of your friends laughing at you when you spill coffee on your new shirt, and you feel a strange connection to these people from the past. You stop at the shore, where the longships bob on the water, their silhouettes barely visible in the darkness. The Vikings' fur fashion was their way of surviving, of standing out, of being remembered. You breathe in the salt air, feeling it cool your skin, and hear the night grow quiet as if inviting you to close your eyes. These pelts you saw everywhere were more than clothes. They were their pride, their art, their life. Now, as the night deepens, let your breathing slow. Imagine yourself lying on a soft fur mat, wrapped in the warmth the Vikings prize. The stars above you twinkle like tiny talismans sewn into the seams, and the waves whisper a lullaby. Let the images of the village, the lawn houses, the dyed pelts, the ringing of feast bells slowly dissolve, leaving only peace. Your eyelids grow heavy, and you feel the Viking world slip into the shadows, taking its stories with it. Close your eyes, let the night embrace you, and let sleep come, soft and warm as a fur cape.